Thanks a lot. I guess I'll just kind of start by telling you folks where it all started for me. Back in November of 2002, a dear friend of mine, Dr. Stephen Mansfield, who's an author, called and said, hey, you remember the folks that were captured by the Taliban before 9/11? And I'm like, oh yeah, the 2 American girls. He goes, well, actually there was 4 Germans, 2 American girls, and 2 Australians. And the folks of Shelter Now International have been basically bombarded with requests from Hollywood to do movies of the week, that kind of thing, and they don't feel real comfortable about it. And they don't really feel like their story will be told truthfully if they allow that to happen. And I told them about you, and they want to meet you. So I met a few folks from Shelter Now International. We had coffee, and I guess things worked out because 6 years later, here we are with a story. That was 2002 November 2002. By 2003, August, September, I was in Afghanistan starting the initial interviews for this documentary. And it's been a long process. It's one of those documentaries that kind of had to unfold on its own, as opposed to you've got X amount of dollars, go shoot it, it's due in 3 months. I purposely, throughout the interviews, staggered them so time could bring back memories for people. I saved the Australians for the last interview session because I knew they would bring a whole new color to the film, especially with their wonderful accents. But that's kind of how it all started. Henry O., Chip, has been here from the very, very beginning. We originally started entertaining the thought of a kind of a Black Hawk Down treatment, a dramatic feature, and the folks, although they appreciated that initial effort, they really felt, the Shelter Now people felt that we really want a documentary. We want to start off with the truth and no embellishments dramatically. So that's what we ended up with. And you want to jump in here? And
yeah. We were right in the middle, actually, of pre-production for our first feature film, The Second Chance, and we had to put Kabul aside for a while to devote the time to get The Second Chance shot and then edited and released and all that. So then we could go back to Kabul once that was done, and picked up about '05 to really do a push and try and get it done. It was just a joy to be able to get to work with Ben on several of these projects, but this is especially dear to us because of the nature. It's true, the story is true, the nature of the story, and the fact that these people had entrusted their story to us. That's a real test of their faith and courage to give their story to not perfect strangers, but at least you know, people that they didn't know, and say, please, you know, be kind. And I think we've been able to do that. As Terry was saying, it is this 105-day odyssey of these 8 Westerners and 16 Afghans who were targeted specifically by Osama bin Laden and the Mullah Omar, who was the leader of the Taliban and still is, but he certainly was back then, said, we want these people because they knew in advance that 9/11 was going to happen, because their capture was in August 5 of 2001, and 9/11 happened 6 weeks later. So the hope was that if we had these Western hostages in captivity, then maybe we could avoid being bombed by the Americans and their allies, and we all know actually what happened. But their story got, I guess you could say, once 9/11 happened, then their story fell off the radar because it consumed our attention, as it should have. And so they were basically forgotten. and the press stopped reporting about them, and you know, they were just, everybody had left, all Westerners had left Afghanistan, and they were alone. They were the only Westerners that they were aware of in Afghanistan after 9/11. Because all emissaries, all envoys, all Red Cross, all diplomats had been forced to leave. So they really felt abandoned, and rightfully so. And through, as it's told in this book and told in the movie, you'll see that, you know, through the course of events, they were able to eventually escape, and then were captured again by some warlords who were holding them for ransom, and then they got a GPS phone through a member of the Taliban who had been helping them secretly at the risk of his own life, got a GPS phone to them, and they were able to contact the Delta forces or the army, and they were then eventually rescued right out of Ghazni. So it's a very, you know, it reads kind of like a thriller. It's the truth, and it's a very exciting kind of story for us to tell, and they were very generous to us to entrust that to us. I want to read about 5 minutes worth of the story, and then we want to take any questions that you might have. As Ben said, in August and September of '03, he went over to Afghanistan to begin the interview process. And it wasn't just interviews, he also went to some of the locations like the prisons where they were held. He went to, of course, the streets of Kabul, a museum that had been bombed out and mined by the Taliban, so that if anybody went in there to use it as a fortress, then, you know, they wouldn't know that there are mines there. And several different locations that Ben was taken to by the Shelter Now people. And I'm going to read part of the prologue where, and all the names of the Afghan SNI people, employees have been changed. So on the film and in the book, just for their own protection. Some of them are still working for SNI. Ben is in this particular location there to film. And one thing I want you to be aware of is, as you know, in sports events and stadiums, baseball, football, you'll see advertisements, billboards of, you know, Nike shoes or, you know, Folgers coffee or whatever. Well, the billboards in this particular location were of the mullahs, the Taliban mullahs were all over this particular stadium. And I think that's about the only thing that you might need to know going into this. Farid knelt on the hard ground of the playing field inside the stadium. He tried to get to his feet, but could not find the strength or will to rise. He was a statue, frozen in descriptive position, his right arm raised, his hand in the shape of a gun pointing to the back of his head. "This is where it happened," he said, a hollow tenderness in his voice. "This is how they killed her." He gently tapped the back of his head with his index finger. "Before the American invasion, the Taliban bring men here for games, they say, for the soccer. But no games, only death." His voice trailed off. Farid looked into the camera, and those around him wondered if he was finished describing what he had witnessed, and if Ben had gotten enough footage of the scenery for his documentary. Farid had led Ben and the others through the tunnel into the stadium. A bright blue sky lay overhead. The stadium was deserted, its seats of concrete fractured and crumbling from the lack of repair. The severe images of the mullahs on the billboards had vanished, their likenesses peeled away and deteriorated into stark white, enormous postcards bleached out from the searing heat and radiant sun. The grass on the playing field was weedy and a brown crust. Farid lowered his arm and rested his hands on his thighs. His thick curly hair waved in the hot breeze, his black mustache a bushy curtain above his white teeth.